What is going on, Call of Duty fans? We're jumping into power rankings here on Checkmate Gaming. My IHOLDSHIFT, good to be with you guys. Good to have you back. And well, this is going to be a hot one and a spicy one. So we're just going to dig straight in because once we get to the top, I think there's going to be a lot of mismatched opinions coming through. So let's start at the very bottom. New York Subliners is my number 12th team. This is a 2-placement drop. But here's the thing. This team has the potential going into the Chicago Home Series of being my highest team on the rise, simply due to the fact that Mac has had now some time to play with these guys, and I think he's going to bring a lot of value to the New York Subliners squad. On top of that, we also have not seen New York play teams like Toronto, Seattle, Los Angeles Guerrillas, or Optic Gaming LA, who have all shown that there are big vulnerabilities. So in their 1-6 record, 8-19 map count, is that necessarily representative of how good or bad this team is? Kind of hard to say. The problem is they rank 11th, 10th, and 11th in each of the 3 modes that we have this year in the CDL. And beyond that, the bigger problem is that they are in a group this weekend of the Chicago Home Series with Chicago, with Atlanta, and I guess fortunately, maybe a little bit of hope in there because there is a London team that is playing without Nasty still. So, it's a little bit rough going here for New York. I hope that Mac has a good weekend. I want to see these guys be on the rise. I think this roster has some potential. It just comes down to, can they work their stuff together? And when are they going to get a chance to play against some of these other teams in the bottom side of the rankings? Because in number 11, I've got the Los Angeles Guerrillas. And the roster move is showing signs of improvement. Some pretty great improvement, to be candid. They were 1-3 versus both Dallas and Florida, where they took both search and destroys convincingly. That's good news. And beyond that, they had a handful of very close hard points. The biggest problem since this roster change, though, has definitively been their domination, which is not to be unexpected. Domination is a tough mode to kind of just instantly get, especially with how some of these maps are manipulated and played. But the good news going into this Chicago weekend is that they play Seattle first, and then they're in an achievable group where they very well could qualify, as Dallas and Optic Gaming LA are in the mix. The biggest problem for this team right now is just the respawn as a whole. 12th in hardpoint, 12th in dom. Their search and destroy has been good, but again, can they find a way to keep that in the wings and maybe try to extend some of these series versus the better teams in their pools to map 5s? That's what they really need. Again, the last time they played Optic Gaming LA, they were up 2-0 after comeback fashion and then dropped the reverse sweep. So things are going to have to change there if they want to try to secure some of these rounds and these matches coming forward and they go to the Chicago series. In my 10th spot, a little bit of a boost here. 2 spots for the Toronto Ultra, as I was essentially questioning, is this just going to be the Cammy show all year long? Look, the fact of the matter is they played well this last weekend, considering that they had to play Florida twice and Dallas. And really, outside of only 2 hardpoint maps, all of their respawns were very close. Their search and destroy, which again has been their biggest strength, did have a couple of highly questionable moments throughout the weekend. And again, that's one of the things that they can really ride to get past some of these squads, is the search and destroy, where again, most of the teams that are in their kind of skill range between Optic, Seattle, LA, New York, that is some of their worst game modes. So for Toronto, if they could keep improving on their respawn, but keep consistently doing well in the search, this team very well could continue to be on the rise. They do have the week off, though, coming into Chicago. In my 9th spot, I've still got this Seattle Surge City here, because imagine a world where this team could win a search and destroy. They would literally be in the middle of the point standing at something right around the world of 4 and 6 at the worst. But alas, they cannot win a search and destroy. And it sucks because this team is super solid in respawn. Even though they're sitting just 9th in the hard point, the minus 12 point differential is not that bad. And they're 3rd in domination. These guys could do it. They could be in the middle. They could be right there in between Paris, London, Optic, but alas, they can't win a search. The good news is they play LAG this upcoming weekend, in which they are currently 2-0 against them and a 6-2 map count to boat. And they could meet Optic Gaming LA for the first time this year. So again, this pool going to the Chicago Home Series for them could be a favorable one. Just win a freaking search and destroy, I'm telling you. It's starting to really bother me, to be sure. Going into my 8th spot, I've got Optic Gaming LA. I was considering dropping them a spot for Seattle, but it's just hard to make that justification considering how good Optic did look when they were playing in LA. And if they can keep playing at that level, they should and definitely could get out of their group this week in Chicago, where they've got Seattle, Dallas, and LAG being the only teams in their way. They grew the most when they played at LA in domination. Momentum changing map, to be sure. That's what they got, the reverse sweep versus LAG. And if they can continue to do work in the domination, they will have a pretty strong case to get out of their pool. So who knows? Respawn has been pretty okay. Again, this is a team that their search, at least win-loss record, has not been super great. So again, there has to be improvements as a whole. But if they can keep riding off of a successful domination and keep things close in the respawn of Hardpoint, they should be okay, I think, to get out of their pool. Going into my 7th spot, to round out the bottom 6, I've got the London Royal Ravens. And again, they still do not have Nasty in the lineup, which is who they want due to travel and visa issues that are coming through. And that hurts, I think, more considerably than maybe some people are putting into the mix, because Nasty is insane. And I think that individually Nasty, with the current roster that has been playing as well as they have been with this London team, could potentially push this team to a top 4 level. But now they go into the Chicago homestand, having to play Atlanta first, and then having to go up against either Chicago, New York in there as well. I wouldn't expect to necessarily see them qualify because, again, Chicago, Atlanta, still looking pretty solid. They would have to rely on sets extending to map 4s, map 5s, if that were to happen, in my opinion. Their search and destroy has been good. Their hardpoint has been good. The biggest question is, will they be able to keep up in the domination versus teams like Atlanta and Chicago, who are currently the number 1 and number 2 ranked teams in domination? That's, again, a big concern for them. So if they can extend series, they can take one of the first hard points, they can take the searches. If they get to a map 5, that's where they can really potentially make an upset happen. I still don't necessarily see that being the case, but still, that's where they would have to go, I think, if they want to surprise a team like Atlanta or Chicago when they meet up against them. Going to the top 6, and this will be probably the last team we have here that is probably going to be mostly agreed upon. I've got Paris Legion in the 6th spot. This is a 1 ranking boost for them coming into this week. And the biggest news for Paris is they're now finally starting to convert off of their search and destroy numbers advantages. They were so good in the early part of the season getting first blood, but then so bad at converting the rounds that they should win. So that's super encouraging. But what is the problem now? Domination. They went 0-3 at the Dallas Home Series at a minus 34-point differential, which is not great. But beyond that, they did play some tight hard points and had a great search and destroy week. They do have the week off going into Chicago, so there is some good news for Paris. They're still looking pretty consistent across the board, but you really need to see them starting to get the dominations a bit closer if they want to break into this top 5, which, again, here we go. The top 5. This is the one moment where everyone is going to be pissed and claim, Shift, you know absolutely nothing.
You're an idiot.
Look, simple point of the matter, this is the tightest top 5 I've ever had to make decisions on. The stat lines are all close. The strength of schedules are starting to get to the point where they're all close, and this is all going to be subject to what do you value individually. Is it strength of schedule? Is it recency bias? What is the determination of a power ranking? I'll try to justify my picks as much as possible. In my 5th spot, I've got the Dallas Empire. Now, tight series versus Toronto, and the loss to Minnesota was one of the reasons why I threw them down below the teams that are ranked above them. It's going to be hard to put them above Minnesota when they just lost to them. Their search and destroy has been incredible. That has been a big boost for why I should probably put them higher, or why you might argue you put them higher. They're currently 3rd in the league, plus 1.3 round on average. But when it comes to respawn, yes, this SMG line did come to life this last weekend. But with that said, there were still some very questionable decisions on how they were rotating across the map. All in all, they went 3-3 in hardpoint at only a minus 7-point average differential. That's not bad at all. 1-2 in the domination at a minus 10-point differential is, again, super tight. I want these guys to be higher, but how can you when they've lost to 3 out of the 4 teams above them either recently or consistently? They do have the potential, though, I will say, in the Chicago Home Series to really have a lot of potential to rise in the rankings, as I think they should be guaranteed a number 1 seed coming out of their group where things are easier. But again, likely they will play up against Atlanta, Chicago in some fashion when it comes to that playoff. So they're going to have to still prove themselves, I think, in my mind, to determine a top 4 spot. Getting to the top 4, I've got Minnesota still holding on to their place. We haven't seen a bad outing from these guys all year long. Period. End of story. They look good during the Minnesota launch weekend. You might be able to argue that they had an easier time in that grouping of a schedule. But regardless, they looked great every single weekend out. The unfortunate thing about this past weekend was the search and destroy definitely let them down late in the tournament versus both Dallas and Florida. but they looked great in hardpoint with only one real poor performance versus Florida on the gun runner, which is their worst map. So that merited staying in the 4th spot. Minnesota still staying consistent, but would need to see them continue to get better at search, I think, if they want to make their rise into the top 3, top 2, or even potentially be the best team in the league. Again, their hardpoint has been great. Their domination has been mostly good all the way through, but the 9th place ranking currently in search and destroy is a bit disconcerting. Going to my 3rd spot, here's where you all lose your minds.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
Chicago Huntsmen is number 3. Look. Before you even go into the comments section, Chicago is statistically a top 2 team. But those stats do not line up in their history versus the Florida Mutineers. And yet we haven't seen them match up versus Atlanta, which will change likely this upcoming weekend at their own home series. That said, they put together a very solid weekend in Dallas until they played Florida, where, again, Florida just looked so much better than them in clutch decisions on things like hard points, where they were able to secure the gun runner and keep the Azir Cave close. Plus, they were able to blow out Chicago, who's the number 2 team in domination, on Hackney Yard domination. It was a massive blowout, and that in its own right was very revealing for me. Florida's beaten Chicago twice. You can argue, Shift, the servers weren't all that great. Doesn't make a difference in my mind. If you look at how the rotations were being played, Florida looked better in the respawns when they played up against Chicago. All I'm going to say. Plus, they took a 6-4 win on the search, so hey, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you there. So let's do it. Let's get it over with. Let's talk Florida, number 2. I know it's hot. I know it's spicy. Maybe too picante for your taste. But this team just went 4-1 in domination this weekend, and they only had to play Petra twice to achieve that. Previous to that, Petra was the really only reason that they were doing well in domination. And to mention beyond that, they beat both Minnesota and Chicago by more than 70 points in dom. They also lost only 3 hard points, the worst of which was only by a margin of less than a single hill. Everything else was 220 or 230 plus. Again, they beat Chicago twice. I have to put them above them just for that reason alone. And let's be honest, they looked much better the second time around than they did the first time around. They'll be going into an off week into the Chicago home series. Now we go to number 1, Atlanta FaZe. Yep. But here, it's proving time for Atlanta FaZe. Chicago is in their group. Dallas is, again, going to be waiting for them, although that's not really much of a concern for them, as it will be their 3rd matchup versus Dallas, where they're currently 2-0 at a 6-0 map count. So we'll see our first go of Atlanta, Chicago. I know you're going to be real upset about that Florida pick, but for me personally, Florida's beaten Chicago now twice with a pretty wide gap in between the 2 times they've played. And yeah, you can argue, well, shit, Florida, they lost to Toronto. I don't think it makes that much of a difference to me. That series was relatively close outside of the search, and again, out of all the searches that they played, Florida got better in search and destroy throughout the weekend. That's what I got. Let me know. Let me know how crazy I am in the comments. I know you guys are going to be really mad about that pick, but that's just how I believe things will go. Again, Florida does have the week off. Atlanta has to prove themselves. Chicago has to prove themselves. And Dallas will eventually have to prove themselves, you feel like, going into the Chicago home series. Coming up next, we will be doing a full predictions of the weekend, give you our thoughts on not only all the teams, but how they match up versus their immediate opponents in their groups. We'll break down the format of the weekend, and we've also got Draft Buff Fantasy Now coming up for you guys to break down who are the top picks, either to enter into your league or to who potentially pick up, and who's got the highest value in the Draft Royale, which again, you can pick a new team every single week. And maybe, who knows, we'll do one way here with Checkmate Gaming where we'll open things up and maybe you guys can play. I'll play around with that tomorrow. The video for the Draft Buff will hopefully be out either tomorrow or the day after. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell. All of my videos that you guys hopefully enjoy will be coming here to Checkmate Gaming. So until the next time we see each other, hope you keep holding it down. Later. Bye-bye.